Hello, I'm Roger Bloor and I'm the owner of Clayhanger Press. And I want to welcome you to the launch of our newest publication, Oh Beautiful My Country, which is a collection of 12 cinquains. And as you know, their cinquains are 5-line poems with a very strict form of 2, 4, 6, 8 and 2 syllables a line. These cinquains were created by 12 poets in response to an image of an industrial scene of the Potteries taken in the early 1900s by a local photographer, William Blake. The concept for this book arose when I visited the Potteries Museum and Art Gallery in the days when such things were possible, and saw some of William Blake's amazing photographs, which are really evocative of that period. But I was fascinated by one which was titled Oh Beautiful My Country, and struck me as an excellent subject for an ekphrastic poem, or indeed several ekphrastic poems. So I invited 12 poets to view the image and write a cinquain based on the image, and they very kindly accepted the challenge. I chose this form because of its tight, compact format, and as the poets were all responding to the same image, then the variation in the poems would be down to the difference in how the image triggered the poet's imagination and creative ability, and I hoped that this would produce an interesting and challenging mix of poems, and indeed it did. There's an interesting link between photography and poetry in that they're often judged by the nature of the end product. But both have fascinating processes involved in producing that final product. The book itself is hand printed and hand bound, and letterpress printing and book production also have an underlying production process that's often underappreciated. Letterpress printing in particular is a dying art, and I thought it might be of interest to look at how this book was produced. So here's a very brief glimpse into the rather inky and murky world of Clayhanger Press. So letterpress printing involves using lead type, setting it letter by letter into composing stick, into words, and then once the lines are set up with leads in between and you've got enough to fill a chase, then the words are the type's locked up into the chase. As you can see, they're upside down and back to front, which makes it interesting doing proofreading, and any blocks are set in above the type and locked in as well, and then the print and the type come off at the same time. Any fluorons, the pretty patterns, are made from individual bits of type stuck together in the right order, as are all the borders. Once the type's set, then it goes into the printing press. That's an 8.5 Adana, the small ones are 5.3 on the other side, and inked and one page printed at a time. Once all the pages have been printed, a page at a time, and dried, then they need to be creased in the creasing machine. It's far more accurate than doing it by hand, and you can in fact do 3 or 4 sometimes pages at once, which speeds it up. The pages are then collated by hand and ready for the next process, which is to pierce them for the binding. So they're transferred to a binding jig, which is a V-shaped apparatus, which allows you to mark exactly where the holes are going to go for the sewing. In this case, it's a 3-stitch binding, so that there are 3 holes made using the marking card, and then those are then used to sew with. The clip is to keep it all in the same position until it's sewed. The sewing is done with waxed thread. It makes it run easier, and you can see the lump of beeswax just above my arm there, which is what I use to make sure that it's properly waxed. The sewing is done and tied off using a reef knot. Can be on the outside or the inside. This current edition, I'm doing it on the inside. Once the sewing's been done, then you get creep from the inside pages, which stick out further than the cover because of the thickness of all the sheets of paper, and they then have to be trimmed off, and use a large commercial guillotine for that, which clamps all the pages together and avoids them sliding about whilst they're being cut. And also you need to put a marker card on top to avoid any crease presses in the front cover. So that once that's tightened up and clamped and cut, then the book is then ready for its dust cover, which is made by gluing together two pieces of paper and folding and binding it around the cover, and there the book's finished. So, having looked at the mechanics of producing the book, let's hear a little more about the image and hear the poets comment on and read their cinquains. The Blake image was used by kind permission of the Potteries Museum and Art Gallery, and Joe Perry, one of the museum's curators, has very kindly produced a brief introduction to the work of William Blake and an explanation about the collection of photographs which they hold within the Blake archive. Joe Perry.
Hello, my name is Joe. I'm the curator of local history at the Potteries Museum. Roger has asked me to say a few words at this book launch, really about the photograph he's used in the book and a little bit, I guess, of context about William Blake and who he was and what he did. I'm very lucky in my role. I get to look after lots of interesting, wonderful objects and collections, and one of those is the William Blake Archive, which is around 1,500 mainly glass plate negatives of images that capture the social history and landscape of the Potteries, Stoke-on-Trent, North Staffordshire, and a little bit wider than that as well in the early decades of the 20th century. So it's lots of the photographs are very famous and evocative and atmospheric. It's also a very, very useful historical record of what's changed. And that's still true to this day. So who was William Blake? Well, he was actually born in Pennsylvania in the United States in 1874, although his mother was from Newcastle-under-Lyme. And Blake did eventually come over and settle in North Staffordshire himself, and in 1900 he opened a stationer's shop in Longton. And as a already kind of skilled and enthusiastic photographer, as part of his business at his stationer's shop, he would sell his own prints and postcards of his works. And this isn't such a strange thing to do. Postcards were a really big business in those days. They were sort of a text message or email of their day. If you wanted to send a quick, short message to someone, that's the way you do it on a quick postcard, and off it went, especially if it's someone who doesn't live far away. It was probably your quickest and best means of getting a message to them. Now, in his stationer's shop in Longton, Blake would have found himself surrounded by this dense, smoky, industrial landscape, because even amongst all the 6 towns of the Potteries, Longton had the reputation for having that densest concentration of factories and bottle kilns crammed in side by side with houses and shops. And he was moved to capture that landscape, and that brings us very nicely to the work featured in Roger's book. This photograph is called "Oh Beautiful My Country," and you can see a smoky scene of Longton looking down from Sandford Hill. And we think this was probably taken about 1908, this particular photograph. And actually, Blake captured a lot of photographs from Sandford Hill. This is quite close to where the Blake family house was, and it's there was a nice bit of waste ground nearby where you could look down the hill and had a really good view out over Longton. So it's a good viewpoint for capturing this kind of atmospheric, evocative, smoky pottery scene. And these were very popular postcards, and they endured long after Blake's death as popular scenes of the Potteries. In fact, long after many bottle kilns stopped operating and the sky was a lot cleaner. This remained the way people imagined Stoke-on-Trent for a long, long time. And this kind of work with these smoky bottle kilns, you can see along the bottom of the image in Roger's book, the classic shapes of bottle kilns, filling that alongside other chimneys and factories amongst them too. But the common thing on a few of these images are these ironic kind of tongue-in-cheek titles. There's another famous one of a smoky skyline, and with a festive theme, because that one is a bit thick for Father Christmas. Hence the and there's also the famous Devil in the Potteries one, where Blake superimposes a large devil-like creature into his photograph. But he wasn't just poking fun or making jibes about the landscape. I think he did have a real love for this place, and I think you'd have to love a place to spend so much time travelling and photographing it, particularly if you think about the heavy equipment Blake was hauling around with him. Large wooden camera, large wooden tripod, and no digital camera, no film. In the early days, you were carrying around a big heavy box of glass plates on which you were taking your photographs, so you'd have to love it to do it. And he didn't just travel the Potteries, he travelled elsewhere in Staffordshire. Places like up into the Peak District as well, places like the Manifold Valley and Dovedale. He got up out into Cheshire, places like Macclesfield Forest. And what he created, knowingly or unknowingly, was a record of how people were living and working and playing, and how the landscape and towns like the 6 towns in the Potteries were changing. And that's still a really, really useful historical record. And when Blake died in 1957, that unique archive was captured by the City Museum. It was acquired, and that museum is now the Potteries Museum. And we still have that record, we still have that archive, and it's available for people to come and research and look at. And lots of it is actually on the internet. And if you search for Staffordshire Past Track or Exploring the Potteries in Google, and then once you're on those websites, search for William Blake, you'll see many of his images capturing the social history and development of the Staffordshire landscape. I'll let you get back to Roger now. Thank you for using our image, and all the best. Thank you.
So it's almost time to hear from the poets, and I'm really pleased to say that to introduce the poets and the book, we have Glyn Maxwell. Glyn Maxwell's a well-known and well-established poet and playwright. He's won a number of prizes over the years, and his work's been shortlisted for the Forward, the Costa and the T.S. Eliot prizes. Many of his plays have been staged in the UK and the USA, and he's written libretti for several major operas. He's the author of On Poetry, which is a really interesting and readable guide to the craft, and also the author of Drinks with Dead Poets, its fictional sequel. His latest publication, collection of poems, How the Hell Are You? It was published by Picador earlier this year. So thanks to Glyn Maxwell for doing the introduction, and here he is, Glyn Maxwell.
Hi, I'm Glyn Maxwell. Most of the poets in this really exquisite little book I've taught in the MA at the Poetry School, or now meet and discuss poetry in a workshop following that. And I don't normally offer that. This is a really terrific cohort of poets who've also become friends in a really admirable way, friends and fellow poets and critics of each other's work. And it's wonderful to hear their voices in miniature here, these very elegant poems from Clayhanger Press. I wish the book all the best, and I absolutely recommend these poets and the book to you. Happy Christmas.
Our first poet is Caroline Davis. Caroline is the author of 3 poetry books. Her latest, Elements of Water, was published by Green Bottle Press in 2019. Caroline Davis.
Hello, I'm Caroline Davies, and I'm one of 12 poets who have contributed to this gorgeous handcrafted book, O Beautiful My Country. We were all given the same photograph, taken in 1910 by a local photographer called William Blake. Before I read my poem, I'll just say a few words about the approach I took to the photo. As you may be able to see, the bottom of the photograph is all dark with smoke and chimneys. But if you look up, there is the sky. So I wrote a poem about looking up and to encourage you to look up, which somehow feels necessary in this year we've been having. The title of the poem functions as the first line. Above the smog of chimneys, endless, clear sky enough to swallow vast mouthfuls of black, leaving behind only white, still air. Thank you for listening.
Next, we have Sue Wallace-Shaddad. Sue is a Suffolk-based poet, and her pamphlet, A City Waking Up, was published in October this year by Dempsey and Windle. Sue.
Hello, I'm Sue Wallace-Shaddad. I was struck by the smoke coming out of the tall chimney in the photograph. It looked like a question mark. It made me think about what constitutes beauty. Smoulder. Look down, see the beauty billowing in the smoke-grey sky, how it questions our views, replies.
Our next poet is Mary Mulholland. Mary is a London-based poet. She co-edits the Alchemy Spoon and runs the Red Door Poets. Mary Mulholland.
Hi, my name is Mary Mulholland, and when Roger sent me the photograph by William Blake of Oh Beautiful My Country and invited me to take part in his stunning cinquain book, what struck me at once was that the photograph was of course in black and white and is full of fog and smoke and shadows, which made me think of shades, which made me think of ghosts. And I thought how well this illustrated being foggy-headed, confused, unable to see the way forward, how many people live half-lives shuffling through their days as if in fog, like blinkered horses. I thought of horses that don't see in colour like humans, and I thought how it would be to live in a world of grey, letting any colour belong simply to dreamland which can vanish like a trace. And then I thought of one day opening a blind, seeing all that rich colour, just waiting to be enjoyed. But maybe the thoughts came after the poem. Here is the poem. She dreamt in colour, but until the fog lifted, she thought it was normal to live with blinkers and just shades of grey. Thank you.
Now we have Vanessa Lampet. Vanessa is an acupuncturist and poet from Oxfordshire. Her pamphlet was published in November this year by Live Canon, and Vanessa is also one of the co-editors of The Alchemy Spoon. Vanessa Lampet.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Lampet. I'm so proud to be part of this project and to appear in this really wonderful handmade book that I keep looking at the spine of to see the red stitching. It's just such a lovely thing. When Roger showed me the picture, first of all I saw a kind of lot of smog and dirt, and then I realised that the sky seemed to be winning the argument for supremacy, and I think the cinquain, which is remarkably difficult to write, is contrasts so much with that because it's such a small, tight thing. And this is my cinquain. Wherever you are, more sky than city, more light than cloud, more lifting than falling. With you is more than enough. Thank you.
Next we have Diana Cant. Diana was trained as a child psychotherapist. Her pamphlet Student Bodies 1968, which is set here in North Staffordshire, was published by Clayhanger Press in March this year. Diana Cant.
Hello, I'm Diana Cant, and my poem is called Aspiration. The inspiration for this poem came originally from my association with the Potteries. I was a student there for 4 years, many years ago, but at a time when there were still the visual vestiges of its industrial past. So it's an area that's always retained a special place in my affection. The inspiration for this poem on the page, it's a shaped poem, and the shape was originally designed to follow the contours of light and shade on the photograph. On the page, it looks like either a heart or a cup, a vessel of some sort that seemed appropriate for the Potteries. The title, Aspiration, it obviously has a dual meaning in terms of hope and breathing. But also, if you look very closely at the photograph, in the smoke you can just see rising a small church spire. Aspiration. Oh, my soul seeks the truth of honest men, whose hands craft a vessel of fellowship and toil.
Now we have Veronica Zundel. Veronica's a freelance non-fiction writer and has an MA in writing poetry from Newcastle University through the Poetry School in London. Veronica Zundel.
Hello, I'm Veronica Zundel. When I saw the image that Roger sent us for this project, my eye immediately moved to the smoke coming up from the chimneys. And I started thinking about how that smoke might have affected the breathing of the people who lived in that area. My father was a chest physician who mostly treated lung disease. We were based in Coventry, but he had a clinic in Tamworth once a month, so not quite in the Potteries, but in Staffordshire. And he was treating things like pneumoconiosis from the mining in Coventry. So I started kind of conflating the smoke and the clouds with the breath of the people who worked and lived there. And I wrote this, Pipes. Our breath, black as pipe smoke, rising from kiln chimneys. Cloud-bound, we mould clay. We are clay. We are.
Now we have another London-based poet, Arpit Kaushik. Arpit works in technology, and his debut pamphlet, What We Say Is Home, was published earlier this year. Arpit.
There were many things which went through my mind while writing this poem. I had just come out of a meditation session, and the central whiteness in the sky, that sort of led me on to the concept of the third eye. And the whiteness also reminded me of the froth on top of a flat white. The chimney with its smoke reminded me of a Havana cigar, so that's the Havana ring I refer to. And in general, there was this gloominess in the atmosphere, and in this picture, the grayness of it all. We were in the middle of a lockdown. So yeah, that inspired the whole title of Smoke Down. Thank you. Smoke Down. A third eye cycles grim Havana rings. A sense of time imprints the day on this flat white.
Next we have Mary Powell. Mary's a Northern Irish poet and an ex-coffee drinker. She likes the inside and outside experiences of wilderness. Mary Powell.
Hello, my name is Mary Powell, and my poem is Lost. Firstly, thank you very much to Roger at Clayhanger Press for this excellent and moving project. I was both struck by the image and perturbed by Blake's title, Oh Beautiful My Country. It felt somehow sarcastic and finger-pointing when attached to the image of an industrial town, where the people lived and worked in extremely harsh conditions, but whose beautiful creations graced the tables of monarchs. The process of writing the cinquain was for me a sort of beauty for ashes experience, and I do hope this comes through as traces in this tiny poem. The title of the cinquain is Glossed, which comes from the process in which the glaze is fused at high heat. I like the kinship the word has with ghost, and the notion of glossed over and lost are in there too. Here's the cinquain. Glossed, potter, early till late, kindle, fire, melt and glaze, flower our eyes with make-believe, Wedgwood. Thank you very much for listening.
Sara Levy is another London-based poet. She's completing her poetry MA with Newcastle University through the Poetry School, and her poems have been published in a variety of places, including Poetry News and a number of anthologies. Sara Levy.
The contracted form and precision of the cinquain was a challenge. The title of my poem came from reading about the Potteries and the Staffordshire industrial landscape. I wanted to communicate the feeling of soot and labour, of trudging back from a long shift, grimy and tired to your bones. I'm Sara Levy, and this is my cinquain. Black by day, red by night. A day, smoke stuttered, dropped in kiln ash, spat up, black and wiped on the greasy cuff of a night.
Next we have Judith Wozniak. Judith won first prize and third prize in the Hippocrates Prize 2020, and her pamphlet Patient Watching is due to be published by Hedgehog Press. Judith Wozniak. Now we have Judith Wozniak. Judith won first and third place in the Hippocrates Prize 2020, and her pamphlet Patient Watching is to be published by Hedgehog Press.
I'm Judith Wozniak. The image reminds me of the view from my bedroom window, overlooking the village rooftops and the church in the distance. My poem is written at the end of the first lockdown when time seemed to slow. From my window. Days end, the light dwindles. Beneath the scrim of dusk, skeins of smoke ribbon the rooftops. Time stills. Thank you.
We have now Erica Jane Morris. Erica has an MA in writing poetry and is a principal fellow of the HEA, working on academic standards, as well as being a poet who often writes on insects and other wildlife. Erica Jane Morris.
Hello, my name's Erica Jane Morris, and firstly I'd like to thank Clayhanger Press and Roger Blore for including my poem Pipistrelle Bat in this beautiful anthology, Oh Beautiful, My Country. Initially, my response to the image led me to read about coal mining in the area, particularly pit brow women, and I wrote a couple of poems about that. But then I found myself reading about bats and how they can adapt to industrial landscapes and roost in old warehouses and mine shafts and caves. And then of course I realised that in the spring and summer, outside in our garden at twilight, there's two bats, sometimes one, sometimes two, swirling and looking for insects. So I ended up writing about bats. Pipistrelle bat. Kind while, whirling, I pipe in drift with kin, singing, raising, rising, pip pip, in snips, lift, swift. Thank you.
Finally, we have Lizzie Balaguer. Lizzie was the winner of the Clayhanger Press cinquain competition to get the 12th slot in the book, and Lizzie's an avid consumer of coffee, tea and poetry, and writes a landscape poetry blog. Lizzie Balaguer.
Hello, my name is Lizzie Balaguer, and I want to read you the poem From the Potteries that I wrote for Clayhanger Press. Chimneys. Bricked stacks belching midnight across Staff's day. Later, we take Darjeeling tea at 4. Closely examining Blake's photograph of the Potteries, I was forcibly struck by the extraordinary contrast between the filth engendered by mass production of pottery and the fine delicacy of bone china with its pure white glaze, eggshell thin curves and golden rims. That thought in turn reminded me of Alexander Pope's satirical poem The Rape of the Lock, in which courtiers meet where they can sometimes counsel take and sometimes tea, and details of the fine china are described in comical hyperbole, Pope seeming to make clear that courtiers were dead to the challenges of the very industrial activity that actually made their own leisured life possible. So I'll just read a few lines of The Rape of the Lock. For lo, the board with cups and spoons is crowned, the berries crackle, and the mill turns round. On shining altars of Japan they raise the silver lamp, the fiery spirits blaze. From silver spouts the grateful liquors glide, while China's earth receives the smoking tide. At once they gratify their scent and taste, and frequent cups prolong the rich repast. I had a lot of fun writing this little cinquain, even though the subject is quite dark. And I'm grateful to be a part of the Clayhanger Press project here. It's a lovely book. Thank you very much for including me.
So sadly, that's the end of the book launch. I'd like to thank the poets for producing such interesting cinquains from the image and showing such a variety of interpretations of a simple image, and for keeping me occupied during several months of the pandemic lockdown. I'd like to thank Joe for his introduction to the book. Thank Glyn Maxwell once more for his introduction, and to say that if you'd like to buy a copy of the limited edition of Oh Beautiful My Country, then they are available from Clayhanger Press. The address for that is now on the screen. And whilst you're there, if you'd like to buy any other of our interesting range of publications, then that would help to support a small independent press. So, thanks to the poets, thanks to Glyn and to Joe, and thank you to you for attending tonight. So it's goodbye from me, it's goodbye from Clayhanger Press, and goodbye from William Blake and his interesting image, Oh Beautiful My Country. Good night.